So I'm just going to talk through our journey at Genesis, and really starting with why Agile, why did we think that was a good idea. Then I'm going to talk about how, so what the last 3 or 4 years has looked like. Scrum at scale at Genesis, which is the sausage, so mashing all that together, kind of spells sausage. That's kind of where we are at the moment, so how we work. In that, there's a chapter model that we use. It's a bit similar to Spotify. Then I'm going to talk about the goal for the future, so where we're trying to get to, and then some of the key lessons that we've learned along the way. And the way we're going to do this is the last slide. I'm going to do this all via drawing, so hopefully it works. Cool. So starting with why Agile, and we really started about 3 or 4 years ago, or slightly more than 4 years ago now, and we got this new exec team that came in. Genesis had been around for a while, and they came in and did a bit of analysis and went, well actually, Genesis is considered kind of boring, quite slow, steady, no real change in the industry for a long time, but there's all of these new startup energy companies getting lots of customers. The energy market had been deregulated, and what we found was there was not really a barrier to entry anymore. So if you could write some software, you could basically sell electricity, which really shifted the market. It wasn't quite a burning platform kind of, we're going to go out of business, but it was a, hey, we probably need to do something a bit different, because these new companies are coming in, they're small, they're fairly nimble, they're pretty fast, and they're starting to take our customers, which obviously is not a good thing. So the new leadership team went, well, actually we think Agile is quite a good fit, should make us nice and able to react, able to do things a bit quicker, and able to compete. So that's where we started, and 4 years down the line we haven't got there yet, but we've made a pretty good stab, and we haven't changed our mind about whether Agile is a good idea, so we're still doing that. That's kind of the starting point. So how did that go? To start with, and I'll just draw a little diagram to kind of illustrate. So we started with some pockets of Agile, really groups of Scrum teams, and they're in the technology part of the business. And that was pretty traditional. You start in your technology teams, they run Scrum, and not much else changes. And we went, that's okay, but that's not really the only piece of Genesis that delivers to the customer. So those teams being Agile on their own doesn't make much difference to the customer. So the next step was to bring our product marketing teams, and we started what we called the customer tribe. And that was really an attempt to go, well, how are we going to deliver as a whole product marketing area of the business as fast as possible to our customers, and across various areas of the business. So we brought in marketing teams, we brought in the teams that built some of the software products, we brought in the pricing teams, and all those kind of components or skills that you need to deliver something, and we could deliver some things to the customer a bit faster. Now, kind of in between these two, we started to bring lots of our technology in-house as well. So in the past we had third parties building stuff for us, and that's quite a slow process. So we kind of brought lots of our tech in-house as well, which kind of gives a bit of background on that. So this was about 150 people with a various amount of skills to deliver some stuff. So this was about 8 Scrum teams. So where we've got to now is that this has grown so that it encompasses the whole of our retail business. So that's the the technology parts of the business, and then all of the customer-facing retail parts of the business. So, for example, our call centre operates in this framework. Lots of our teams that support customers, like billing teams, things like that, and that's about 750 people. That's quite a growth over approximately 4 years. And so what I'm going to talk to is I'm going to talk to a bit about where we are now, and how it's not quite perfect, but what we're trying to do. So the foundation of our retail organisation is Scrum Teams. So we have lots of Scrum Teams, and they're pretty traditional Scrum teams. Some of them don't run Scrum, they run Kanban, but they've got the same structure as a Scrum team. With a Scrum Master and a Product Owner, and you can multiply that up to whatever number of teams you want. Each of these teams has some people in it, and ideally they can deliver a piece of a product end to end, so from idea to the customer. Oops, I lost the product owner. Now we group our teams together into different tribes. So we have a group of Scrum teams. Each of those set of Scrum teams is grouped into a tribe. And that tribe delivers a piece of something. So for example, we have a residential area of the business, so they deliver to our residential customers. We have business, they deliver to our business customers. We have a digital tribe, which is where I look after, and they deliver the digital products. But within that, each of these teams has the ability to deliver something. That doesn't mean that they have the ability to deliver a whole product, but they have the ability to deliver a component of that. So for example, some of these teams are our app teams, and they can deliver new features into the app. So the way we make these tribes work is based on Scrum at Scale. And the way that works is we get our Scrum Masters, and they form together into a Scrums, which is basically a group of Scrum Masters, but runs very similar things to Scrum. So they don't run like full Scrum, but they perform lots of the same functions as a Scrum team. So they'll do things like run a retrospective where they'll continually look at how these teams are working together, and they'll plan across an increment. So within this, we also have tribe lead, and they form effectively a Scrum team. This is the how side, and we have exactly the same thing on the what side, so the product owner side. The product owners form up a team, which we call a meta Scrum. And that's a group of product owners and a business owner or a general manager, who effectively acts as a chief product owner. And this set of product owners are responsible for making sure the tribe is working on the right things, so they're what the tribe works on. It's a fairly simple structure that way. Now, if you've seen Scrum at Scale, you'll recognise that this is fairly similar to that. And the point of it is that you have a component, and you can take this and you can multiply it up as many times as you like, the same as you've done with your squads or your teams inside this tribe. So you can add more and more meta Scrums, which represent more tribes, and they come to, they own the what for their tribe, and then come together into what was called an executive meta Scrum, or in Genesis what we call our retail segment review, which basically is looking at what these teams are working on across all of the different tribes. scrums, which is basically a group of tribe leads who are responsible for making sure that all of the tribes work together in an effective way and deliver as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And in theory, you can keep going and you can make a scrum, scrums, and on the other side, you can make an executive meta scrum. So it's a nice, simple, scalable model that people understand, and you can kind of draw it relatively easily, which is one of the big benefits of this model, is that it's actually relatively simple. We have a nice division of the how on one side, so how these teams work together, versus the what on the other side, which is what those teams are working on. Just one thing I've kind of skipped over there is that all of these general managers or business owners come together in here and work on the prioritisation across the tribes. So each of these tribes is prioritising for their group of teams or squads, but where there's dependencies or contention between the different tribes, that will go to the retail segment review or executive meta scrum, and they can make prioritisation decisions. So to support all of that, we have chapters which run this way, and they have a chapter lead, and they are responsible for making sure that all of the people that do a similar role have the right skills, we've got the right people in the right teams, and they have standards or consistency where necessary. And those chapters run across all of the different tribes, which gives us the consistency of approach between different roles. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's one person from every chapter in every team, but where appropriate, those people are in a chapter. And then we have a group of chapter leads, same kind of structure, where they meet together and make sure that they're operating their chapters in a similar way. So you've got this kind of consistency across the different chapters and then within the chapters. So that's the really basic model. What we've done recently is we've found that these tribes, because of the pieces of work or the products that we deliver being fairly complex and needing lots of different teams, these tribes and the teams within those tribes don't necessarily have all of the skills to deliver that piece of work. So we've attempted to make the tribes more end-to-end, where they can own more of the product and therefore have less dependencies and be faster, essentially. So we've started to introduce the concept of a centre of excellence. And so I guess there's three fundamental types of team. You have a chapter, which is similar skill sets, which don't work day to day together, so work across lots of different teams. Then we have a squad or a scrum team, and they work day to day on the same thing but don't have the same skill set. And then we have a centre of excellence, which is kind of both of those, so they work together day to day on the same thing and they have a similar skill set. But it wouldn't necessarily work to spread those people out across the whole organisation. So a good example of that is a call centre team, where you wouldn't put one person from each or from that into every single squad, because that just wouldn't work. So you have them in a single team. They work together day to day. They have similar skills, but they support a particular tribe. So we have a structure where we have some squads, and then a centre of excellence, potentially 2 or 3. And then this tribe can get closer to delivering all of the things that it wanted, or all of the components of a product without going cross tribe. So maybe we'll pause there for any questions. Yeah.
How do you, maybe it's 2 questions, I'll be cheeky. How do you funnel work into them and fund them? What is the funding model?
Yeah, so the funding model is an interesting one, and actually it's probably worth talking about that before we talk about any of the other pieces. So each of these tribes has funding associated with it. So about 2 years ago, we looked at our funding model and went, oh, it's not really working, because in the past you'd have a piece of work, and the piece of work might be an epic, and that would have some funding associated with it. And what that meant was that because it had funding associated with the piece of work, then people would do that piece of work, whether or not that piece of work was the most important thing that we could be working on. So we tried to flip that on its head and say, okay, we know that we need to do lots of the same kind of things, and we're going to do that consistently over maybe a year. So we funded our tribes, and those tribes have a funding pool, bucket of money, which is roughly associated with all of the teams inside it, and then some other funding for, if you need to buy hardware, licenses, that kind of thing. That kind of flips the conversation on its head. So then these tribes are going, well, given that we're funded, what things are we going to work on? Which then kind of empowers these meta scrums to say, okay, well, let's prioritize, and let's just work from the top of the priority list, and we don't get this kind of thing where there's money associated with pieces of work. So we have an epic, and that epic will have some value, some benefits, and that lets us prioritize it. What happens is that each of these tribes does a particular piece of this work, and not necessarily each tribe can deliver the whole of that piece of work. So there'll be a product owner which sponsors this piece of work, and they'll take that basically through the different groups and get that prioritized where it needs to be prioritized for the people in those squads. So if you've got, say, a group teams here or squads here that need to work on this piece of work, then a product owner from the area of the business where that epic delivers its value, they'll sponsor that piece of work through the system and make sure that these teams are working on that piece of work at the right time and in the kind of the right order. So we take that piece of work and it will go to whichever of these groups need to prioritize the work. Does that make sense?
With the funding, do you do that on a yearly basis or is it revised every quarter?
So we start off with a particular pool of funding, but that can change throughout the year. So each of these tribes starts with a particular amount of money, and they have a process for reallocating funding between them if they decide that a specific piece of work is more important than another piece of work. So basically, if this tribe is working on a list of priorities which they believe is more important than another tribe's list of priorities, then they might go, well, actually, we think we should have more funding, so they can go through this team and get the money basically reallocated. What that really means is it doesn't mean that money's moving around the business. It means that the actual people doing the work move from one area of the business to another. So it might be that they go, well, actually, we can deliver this faster if we have a group of people. So it might be some testers, some BAs, some developers, and they'll move those people. So it's not really the funding itself that gets reallocated. It's more the people, but it does move between the areas.
What's the question? Yeah.
Which consultancy helped you design this model?
Oh, yeah, in-house.
So mainly me, Matt, Bobby, Jeremy.
It's not McKinsey.
No. And our fees are very, very reasonable. If you want to. That question.
How many squads, sorry, will we have, in a tribe roughly? How many tribes
So it's really variable. So we actually have very small tribes, which have basically got 1 or 2 teams in there, and then we've got some fairly large tribes. So the digital tribe has 9 squads, and then various other teams that support them. So it's quite variable, and that kind of depends on how much money the tribe has, but it also depends on how much of the work is required for each of those different areas of the business.
So you talked about trying to disconnect funding of a piece of work from priorities, but surely they are still quite linked. And the question was more about, do you have a priority scoring system?
Yeah, yes, so we do. So each piece of work, we'll look at it and we'll work out what the value of that piece of work is. So we will score the value of the piece of work, and then we'll look at how well it aligns with our strategy, and that gives us a prioritisation, the ability to rank it in order, basically. So this model is kind of the ideal state. We do have pieces of work that come along from outside the retail area of the business, which have funding associated with them. And what that means is that those pieces of work actually come to the chapters. Not all of these people in the chapter would necessarily be in a squad or a team, and they'll actually pull some people and they'll put those people together and do some work. So it's kind of a mixed model where most of the funding is associated with the tribe, but occasionally we have pieces of work that are outside, come from somewhere else in the business, and do have money and therefore can get people. That makes sense. Yeah.
How do you find the impact on your culture shifting people around like that, coming in and out of teams?
So it's actually something that we've worked on over time. So when we first started, we had really unstable teams. So we would have people move based on the priority. People would move a lot, and it would happen really frequently, even as much as once every couple of sprints somebody would be moving team to team. And what we did was we focused on trying to stop doing that, and to make those teams really stable, and then only make changes where it was really necessary. So actually talking about the process of reallocating people between teams, it's actually quite a rare process because our teams are fairly stable. Things on our backlog are fairly well known, and we have a fairly long backlog, so we can see fairly well in advance what we're going to be working on, what kind of people we need, and therefore we know that kind of stuff's coming up, and we try not to move people too much. So over time we measured our team stability, and it actually went, the number of moves went down quite significantly, and that's okay. We still try and move people, so we don't want the teams to stay 100% the same forever. So we aim to move, and we do this particularly in the Scrum Masters, every 12 months to 24 months, because you don't want those teams to become really, really static. So just keeping that keeping that amount of movement stable, but not too high, not too low, is kind of one of our aims.
So you mentioned for each squad, they're enabled in a way for concept of cash. So does retail marketing sort of come into that squad as well, and data, for example, to make it one piece?
Yeah, so where we talked about these centres of excellence, some of them, so for data is a good example of a centre of excellence, where we have a group of analysts or data engineers, that kind of thing, working together day to day. And in the past we've tried to have those allocated out. But lots of the other teams will have the ability to deliver end to end. And it really, for us, depends on the type of people, the type of work, how frequently they're needed by a team. So if you have the analytics or data team and they're only needed once every couple of sprints, then we kind of look at that and we'll make a decision about where they sit, whether they sit in the teams, or whether they sit in the centre of excellence. and that's quite variable across the organisation. That makes sense? Yeah.
So, outside of this picture, I imagine that there are product managers somewhere with these newfangled things that come into the system?
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually, because Genesis, the way we define our product managers is really different to everybody else. So our product managers are actually sat in the squads, working alongside the rest of the squad.
So what's your definition of product owner and product manager is probably another question. Clarity.
Yeah, and so the product owner is the person that's responsible for deciding what the squad work on, working with the stakeholders obviously to make sure that the squad is building the right thing. The product manager understands how within Genesis you need to build a product. So what are the teams you need to work with? What order do you need to do that in? How do you get something basically from idea to market, and then can work with all those stakeholders?
So we, check there's no product managers from Genesis. Before I say this, product manager is a job title, I guess we inherited from the traditional business before we started on this journey. It's far more similar to a BA in reality than it is to what you would, I mean, we talk about it all the time, and we talk about changing the job title, because when you go product manager, pretty much anywhere outside of Genesis, it is quite a different role.
Yeah, follow-up question.
Yeah. So, it's so in terms of disruptive innovation, this I'm imagining is more sustaining innovation. What happens, is that inside of this environment, or have you got a separate incubator or somewhere?
Yes, so we have squads that are dedicated to innovation. So they will be looking at different kind of parts of the cycle of the product. So they'll be looking really early on, and then once they've established that a product is a viable product and they've probably piloted it and things like that, then they'll hand it over to the business. But they still sit within one of these tribes and still deliver inside that structure.
Okay.
Jim?
Do you have a sort of 3-month or 6-month window that you're doing some planning for as well?
Yeah, so we run kind of like safe increments, but we don't really like the word safe. So
Unsafe.
so we'll run basically 3-month increments, which line up nicely with the organisational kind of quarterly cycles, money planning and things like that. And within that we'll have 5 or 6 sprints. So the teams will plan really high level at an increment level, and then they'll plan down at the sprint level throughout that. And that gives us, we've had that for quite a long time, and it gives us a nice tie-in with the organisation and the way they work. It can create this almost artificial cycle where you go, well, we're going to plan on here, we're going to plan for the next 3 months, and then we're not going to do any planning for the next 3 months, and then suddenly here again we're going to plan again. So over time we've kind of reduced the importance of the concept of increments, and started to try and get the teams to plan continuously, so that they're always planning, 3 to 6 months out, and that as the work gets closer to the teams, they get more and more detail on it, and that's helped us with the kind of the lumpiness of the planning cycle. We still have things like an increment planning day, but it's become less about planning and more getting the teams together and talking to each other and building some relationships and that kind of thing.
So is it?
Increment planning, so.
We have a day that we get all the teams together, but there's very little planning that actually happens on those days. Over time, we found that's less and less important.
So 2 years ago, it really was big room planning.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's most teams are planning, had all the conversations, and they're just checking a few things, usually for the first couple of sprints.
How do we cut dependencies across teams?
So that's basically what happens is the product owner who sponsors this initiative or shepherds it through the system will be responsible for making sure that they understand which teams are required, and we keep a pretty tight track of which teams are required, how long for, and what sequence you need to do that in. And they'll be, as you go through the prioritisation process, we'll be making sure all of those teams have the work prioritised by the right people, it's sitting in the right order in the right place. It's a fairly messy process because we have a lot of teams and quite a decent number of tribes as well. So to get a piece of work through the system, you actually potentially need teams across multiple tribes, and potentially therefore need multiple pieces of prioritisation. So that's kind of saying that it's a fairly messy process still, and it's not as neat as we'd like it to be. So actually, kind of following on from that, I think I'll probably talk a little bit about where we're trying to get to next, because we're probably into time. So this is where we are now, and I'll just write this out. We talked a little bit there about how those tribes have some or most of the skills required to deliver a product, but we still have the concept, for example, of a digital tribe where most of the digital teams are embedded. So that gives us this kind of structure where we have some customer-based tribes, so for example, residential and business. And then we have a digital tribe that's essentially delivering lots of the pieces for these tribes, so they can't deliver a piece of work on their own. So what we're trying to do, partially with the centres of excellence, is that we've put more and more of the skills into these tribes, but still there's work down here from these teams. So over time, our goal is to transition these digital teams into the business teams or the business tribes, so that this business tribe potentially has the ability to deliver everything end to end, start to finish, without requiring any other tribes. And that gives us a really nice ability to prioritise here, and then we don't have to manage all those dependencies. It should speed us up and give the tribe a much closer control over the things that they deliver.
Would you not still have core enterprise things that will be common between the two?
We'll always have some things.
Operations
Yeah.
and
Yeah. So there's never going to be the perfect tribe that has everything that can deliver end to end. So some of the really good examples are our legal team, and they'll work with these different areas of the business, but they'll only do that kind of sporadically and ad hoc. So they're a centralised centre of excellence that doesn't sit inside a tribe. So for us, they sit kind of out here, and they'll get requests from all over the business, and then we'll work on that in the priority order that they've kind of decided on. So it's one of our big challenges is working out how to coordinate the prioritisation between those areas of the business that sit inside tribes and those that don't. And we have a few examples of this, where legal, finance, that kind of thing.
Where does architecture fit in?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So, really, architecture fits in a few different ways. So, it kind of fits in this meta Scrum for the digital teams, and where they're building things, architecture team are involved and know what's going on. But they also fit into the process of deciding to do an epic and actually implementing it. So they fit in as almost a toll gate where you go through the process and you work with architecture and work out whether you're building something that fits in with architecture. So it's kind of a partially in the system and then partially in the workflow that we have.
Is it the same for releasing and ops?
So one of the things that we've been working on recently is to pull the operations centres of excellence into the digital area of the business. So traditionally, these teams release all their products, and they might release, very frequently, but they don't do all of the support for their products. So there's a handover. Part of creating these, bringing some of these centres of excellence in, is that we can also bring the operations pieces in, and that we have various different types of operations. So we have technology operations, where they're actually keeping the products running, and then we have our customer operations, which is answering the calls when the customer has a question, and both of those we're attempting to bring into this centre of excellence approach, so that within that tribe they at least control more of the product life cycle.
Where does your security fit in?
So they're a centre of excellence as well, and they will get requests from all over the business, and we'll prioritise those in here, and we'll get involved. They're kind of like architecture as well, in that they'll be in some of the kind of processes that we use to make sure things are following the right patterns and stuff like that.
Does Centre of Excellence operate in the sprint framework?
So there's really variable levels of maturity across the organisation, and if you look back at our kind of how we've grown, most of this growth is in centres of excellence, and we're we think we're a relatively small team of Agile support. So some of those areas of the business have got some support, and therefore have got more mature, started to use some Agile practices, and started to plan in sprints, but none of them really run Scrum, for example. A few of them are kind of starting to run Kanban. Over time, we'd like to embed more practices with those teams and kind of work out what's best for them. In all likelihood, it won't be Scrum, it will be something else, because they're quite different to a Scrum team.
What outcome measures have you used, and what have they looked like from adopting this model?
I guess probably one of the weakest points is to measure when we change or when we build something, what the outcome of that was. It's something that we've started to try and do, but we're definitely not very good at it, and we haven't cracked it. Part of the definition of an epic is, well, what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? And we're getting much better at defining that up front, but we're not yet very good at measuring that, and therefore closing the loop on the when we build something or when we've done something, whether that actually made a difference, and then building more of that into the future products.
What about even like the basic thing like speed to market?
Yeah, so we one thing that we did probably close to 2 years ago now is that when we first set up, this was kind of our customer tribe was really the Wild West, and we let all the teams basically do whatever they wanted. Some support and some control, but not much. And they were all using different systems and things like that. So you'd have some teams in Jira, some in Azure DevOps, some on Trello, some on a physical whiteboard. And we actually pulled all of those together into a single system. And that gave us really good visibility about what was going on, what was changing, and how things like cycle time, speed to market were being affected. So now we have really good visibility of lots of our teams, and over time, one of the key focuses is to get these COEs to put or to have more visibility of their work, so that we can start to measure for a whole product rather than just the teams.
So how do you make the decisions around funding, and how do you communicate those back to the governors, to the board? If measuring is still a challenge, how do you send that back to the board?
So I think it happens in lots of different ways across the organisation and at different levels. So in most of the digital teams, for example, the product owner has full control of the budget. But then in some other areas, the Meta Scrum has visibility. But what tends to happen is it happens at different levels of the organisation, and in different sort of levels of detail. But theoretically, with our finance systems, all rolls up at a tribe level, and then we can make tribe level decisions. So we have, what's probably worth mentioning is we have a finance partner for each of these tribes that sits in this team. It helps us to measure what's going on with our finances, what we spend, things like that, and then we can communicate that through to our retail segment review, our executive meta scrum, and this has some of our exec members on it, so we can kind of roll up the decision making and the information, but it's certainly not something that works perfectly.
Yeah, it's probably just caveat. I was going to say this at the start. When Sam says this is current state, that's like 2 weeks ago. So literally half our tribes don't have a GM, like they're starting on Monday. So, like again, the measurement question for what was the customer tribe, we been running it for a few years, had good view. One of the things we're talking about is, how do we start to create a measurement to say, is this new model working? Particularly as Sam said, as we bring in areas that we don't even have any visibility of what they're working on at the moment. It's a challenge we've got.
What's the responsibility of the tribe lead here?
So it's actually quite different to other places who have the job title tribe lead. So tribe lead sits in this Scrum of Scrums and looks after basically how the tribe works. So making sure that the tribe, the teams within that tribe, and then where that tribe works with other tribes is working efficiently, effectively, and helps with the process of making this tribe work. So the how side. What a lot of other organisations consider a tribe lead is probably what we would consider a GM over this side. So making decisions about the what, but the tribe lead for us sits on the how side, and then the tribe leads together form a scrum of scrums, working out how all of the tribes work together.
Do they deal with the finances?
No, the finance is actually also on the what side, but that's something historically we've had quite a lot of debate about and back and forth, and for a long time the finances did sit on the how side, but for us logically the product owners and the business owners and the general managers should be responsible for making the financial decisions, because they're trying to get the best return on investment from their tribe. So now it sits on the what side. We'll just take one more question and then we'll do last bit.
Where do the line managers fit into this? So who manages the team?
3 axes of that. So we have, if this is an individual, the chapter lead owns the formal line management. So they will line manage all of the people in their chapter, and then you've got the product owner supporting them with what they're going to work on, and the Scrum Master with how they're going to work. So you have this quite nice 3-dimensional kind of control or care of this person. And because the chapter leads don't sit in the squads, it gives the people a nice independence from the rest of their team, and they can work effectively with the Scrum Master and the product owner. Cool. So the last bit to cover off is kind of some of the key lessons that we've learned along the way. And so I think for me, one of the really good things about the way Genesis has done it is that we've started from here and we've got to here, but we haven't just jumped over and gone, well, this is what we think will work, and then taken a stab at it and reorganised everything and then figured out what actually works afterwards. We've kind of relatively slowly and relatively in relatively small steps, we've stepped through and we've kind of changed things and gone from where we started to where we are now without without major big bang kind of changes, which has meant that we've got a relatively sustainable pace of change. And it also meant that we kind of understand why we're changing things. So we've tried some stuff, we've kind of got feedback, and we've got a feedback loop and sort of said, well, that didn't quite work, let's try something else. And we really learn why we made a decision and why that works or why it doesn't work, which has meant that it's still been fairly painful, but lots of the steps and the changes that we've made in the organisation are relatively well understood, and we really organisationally understand why a particular way of doing things is the right way or fits Genesis well. So that's kind of one thing, is that nice small steps, and day to day that feels quite painful. We're taking really, really small steps. See Matt smirking there. But when you look back over 4 years and you look at the organisation, where it started even 6 months, the change is actually pretty big. And not trying to shortcut that and jump to the end state has been really powerful for us. So it's taken a long time, but I think that, and then having a vision of where we want to get to, and then trying to make small steps and small changes to get to that vision is really important. So we have a what we call like Customer Tribe 5.0 or something, I think it is, where we say, well, this is the end state that we'd like to get to. What are all the small steps that we'd like to take? And then as a Agile chapter, we have a backlog of things, and we prioritise that backlog and go, okay, well, what's the next small step or the next small change we can make to get us closer to that, which gives us something to do. So it gives us some things to work on that change the organisation, and it gives us a nice structured way of making those small changes. What we find is that lots of the things we would like to change are kind of outside our control. So we spend time influencing the organisation, trying to understand why things are the way they are, so that we can make small steps or small changes. That's a couple of key things. And then, yeah, just looking back and reflecting on where we've come from to where we are is really powerful for us, because we can see the change over time, and it's really makes us feel pretty good to see where the organisation's gone over the long period. Cool.
I think just to add to that as well, the thing that Sam talked about there, that idea of what 5.0 might look like. By doing it this way, by the time we get to 5.0, that will look substantially different to what it might look like today. Whereas if we just jump straight to that, we probably wouldn't have learned a lot of the lessons that we've learned. I think the other takeaway from this is that this is a lot of hard work that's gone into this, in terms of we haven't just gone, right, let's just copy the Spotify model, because obviously we don't work in digital music and we're not Danish. So it's about finding your own path through it, and yeah, it's painful on a day-to-day basis, but that bit where you come at the end of the sort of the month or the increment or the year and you go, shit, yeah, we've changed an awful lot and it's been for the best. I think that's reflected throughout our organisation, so yeah, it's an interesting path.
Cool. We were going to run a question and answer session, but I think it worked really well with interactiveness in the middle. How many questions do we still have? All of you have questions? So probably we'll do like 5 questions. Cool, we'll start with you. Sorry.
I was just wondering, obviously once you get a certain resource in the tribe that can do good work, what about that resource getting bored? How do you manage that?
Yeah, and so that's a real challenge for the chapter leads, to make sure that they've got the right people in the right places, and that doesn't just mean the right person for the squad. It also means that that person is in the right place for their development. So, so the chapter leads are constantly looking at, well, is there a new opportunity? Where does this person want to grow? Where do they want to go? And I think the chapter leads would consider, if they had the same person in the same squad for a long time and then they got bored and left because of that, they wouldn't have been doing a pretty good job. So they're really trying to make sure that those people have got the right growth opportunities through the organisation. So we try and do that with the Scrum Masters, where we will go, okay, you've got some experience in this area, what's the next step, where do you want to go? And then we'll try and pair that with the opportunities that are actually available. And that's fairly challenging, because there's not always the perfect place to go, but it's kind of a continuous process where we look at where that is and what's right for that person.
be slightly bolder and say, you know, Sam and his leadership of the Agile chapter and the Scrum Masters has set the stall and expectation that we will rotate. So we've actually been through a number of rotations with the Scrum Masters, moving them around, both for their development, for the business. Sam has to manage, obviously, all the product owners and general managers go, but wait. But, you know, to keep people fresh and all those sorts of things.
I think having that 3-tier model as well, so you're not just telling one person that you want to change, you've also got a Scrum Master and hopefully a product owner, if they're responsible, saying, you know, hey, maybe you could go and do better work over here, or have you thought about this challenge, or, you know, could you push yourself a little bit more?
Yeah.
So, how long did it take for teams, especially the lead teams, to achieve a steady and sustainable pace of delivery on average, especially in the beginning?
Sorry, what was the...
How long did it take for digital teams to achieve some maturity and say, okay, like 3 sprints, 5 sprints, 10 sprints?
Yeah, I think it's quite variable by different teams, so it depends. That's probably not a very good answer. So some of these teams, before we even had our kind of customer tribe 1.0, they were running, and they were running in different forms. So it's hard to say, well, when they came in here, they suddenly were mature, but probably, in my experience, it's probably 1 to 2 years to get a reasonable amount of stability and a reasonably consistent, sustainable pace from the team. And that's one of the things that we really stressed when we were talking about team stability with the organisation, is that, hey, if you're changing your team every 2 months, every 3 months, then you're never getting to the point where that team has a sustainable, consistent pace. Some of our teams are quite long-lived now, so because they existed right back here, they could be 4 to 5 years old, and those teams are pretty mature. And you probably find that none of the individuals are the same, but the team has the kind of longevity and the team culture that's built that.
What's the question?
Yeah. So to apply this model and trying to convince the organization is quite complex to do. You have to get the buy-in from the grassroots, but also from the top down. Well, and who were the change resistors, if any, and if so, how did you go about overcoming those challenges?
So we haven't overcome all of those challenges, I guess, is the first thing to say. But we're really lucky at Genesis that we have a CEO and a kind of an executive team that are really supportive of Agile, and then at the team level they're really supportive. I guess the slowest to change is in the middle, where they've done things in a traditional way for a very long time. But one of our key techniques is to set up an area, so a single tribe, get that working quite well, and then start to apply that that approach to the next one and the next one and the next one. We spend a lot of our time thinking about who to influence, how to influence them, what's the best way to demonstrate that something's a good idea or a change is necessary. And, you know, that's a big component of what a tribe lead does. So it's definitely not easy, and it requires quite a lot of focused thought and effort.
I think the other thing we talk about is doing things by stealth, quite a bit. So, which is why I think Scrum at Scale is quite a nice model from principle, because it makes sense, right? So, you know, I think product owner meta scrums, when we first talked to the product owners, and it was, you know, in the general, we should have this thing. You all come together. Nah, don't want to do it. Not interested. I've got my, and so then we just set them up and start inviting them, and they, oh, it's quite valuable. And, you know, talk about that. So, yeah, we kind of, which stuff do you really have to push and get the buy-in, and which do you just kind of start doing, and people go, oh, yeah, there's some value in that.
There was a question here.
Yeah, so for more kind of that comes through Agile roles, like what's been the balance between training up internal teams that are like the Scrum Masters and that sort of stuff, and bringing it externally?
We've not really trained anybody up internally, so it's mostly people come externally. I think one of the challenges with the way we're funded is that you have a tribe that's got some budget and a chapter that has some people, it's really hard as a chapter lead to go, well, do you want this person that's never done this before, or do you want this experienced one? For me as a chapter lead, it's really hard to go in and go, well, you've got to have this brand new person. But we're looking to change that and to change some of the way we're funded so that we can do that, and then we can give those people to the teams later on once they've kind of grown and they've got to the point where they've got enough experience to really make a difference. But generally it's pretty hard. All of the chapters have a similar problem where you have demand for really experienced people.
What you find is most of the squads, because of that, go, I want an intermediate or a senior, whatever, right? Forget, I don't want a junior because I've only got one of them or whatever, and so that is a challenge for us, definitely.
The last question. Yes, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the change management process and the vision and really making that why clear? But what were some of the things that you've done to really help embed the culture through the teams or through the organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're probably not very good at that. So we have a group of agile professionals who will go out and they'll try and kind of embed that culture in the teams. But it's not really a concerted effort from us to change the culture. I guess one thing that's been beneficial though is at the same time as this, we've had a cultural change program in the organisation going on as well, where we've said, well, what's the desired culture that we'd like to get to? We've kind of set that, and that aligns nicely with the agile principles and the culture we'd like to create. So they've kind of dovetailed quite nicely, which has meant there's some cultural change, but cultural change is really the heart of this, right? So you've got to change the way people behave and do things, and that's just really slow. You can't just say, well, this is the culture we want you to follow, and then people magically do it. It's really chipping away at that day to day, and having the ability to go, well, that doesn't really match our desired culture, and kind of calling that out. But it's a long, painful, slow process.